Welcome to Unspoken Affairs. Sometimes the quietest homes carry the loudest echoes of loss. A silence so heavy it seeps into the walls, into the air, into every small corner of a life once filled with laughter. This is the story of a family that was once whole, ordinary, and full of warmth, and how grief reshaped them into strangers living under the same roof. Daniel Mercer was a man who, not long ago, embodied lightness. He was the kind of father who whistled old rock tunes while folding laundry, who flipped pancakes shaped like dinosaurs on Saturday mornings, who danced around the kitchen until his daughter's giggles filled the air like wind chimes in summer. He was the husband who never forgot to kiss his wife on the forehead, even when rushing out the door. The Mercer home had once been alive, alive with music, alive with love, alive with little rituals that seemed so ordinary they were almost invisible. And then everything changed. Mara, Daniel's wife, Sarah's mother, fell ill. At first it seemed temporary, like an unwelcome visitor that would eventually leave. There were treatments, hospital visits, whispered reassurances that this was just a season they had to endure. Sarah, only 10 years old, clung to hope because that was all she had. But slowly, day by day, she watched her mother grow weaker. The light in Mora's eyes dimmed. Her voice, once the steady anchor of their family, grew faint. And then one day it was gone altogether. The morning after Mara passed away, the house felt different. It was the same structure, the same walls, the same furniture, but something vital had disappeared. What had once been vibrant and warm felt pale and cold even when sunlight poured through the windows. The air itself seemed to hang heavy. The walls stood still and silent, and the echoes of laughter that once filled the rooms had dissolved into memory. Daniel kept going, but not in the way people live. He moved through routines mechanically. Breakfast still appeared on the table. Sarah still had help with her school projects. Bills were still paid on time, but there was no joy in it. The sparkle that had once lit up Daniel's face was gone. He became a shadow in his own home, present in body but absent in spirit. Sarah felt the shift immediately. She was still just a child, but childhood as she knew it ended the moment her mother's heart stopped beating. She grew up too fast, shouldering responsibilities she had never been prepared for. To escape the emptiness at home, she busied herself with everything she could. School, sports, clubs, anything to keep her mind full and her body moving. Cheerleading. Practices stretched late. Volleyball games swallowed weekends. Advanced classes filled her nights. She built a schedule so full there was barely room to breathe because momentum was easier than stillness. Stillness meant silence. Silence meant grief. To the outside world, Sarah looked like the model daughter. Teachers praised her dedication. Coaches admired her strength. Friends envied her ability to juggle so much. But none of them knew the exhaustion that lived deep in her bones. None of them knew how many nights she lay awake staring at the ceiling, counting the hours until dawn, her chest aching with a grief she didn't dare speak aloud. None of them knew how badly she longed for someone to hold her while she finally let it all out. At home, she and Daniel grew distant in quiet, imperceptible ways. They stopped eating meals together. The television often played to no one, just background noise filling a house that had grown too quiet. Conversations shrank down to logistics. Who needed the car? What bill was due? What schedule needed adjusting? They crossed paths in hallways, but rarely connected. The intimacy, the warmth, the little moments of laughter, all gone, erased by a silence neither of them dared to break. Sometimes Sarah would glance at her father and try to remember the man he once was. The man who told bedtime stories and sang badly on purpose just to make her laugh. But what she saw instead was a figure hollowed by sorrow, a man trapped in his own grief, drifting further from her with each passing day. And though she longed to bridge the gap, she didn't know how. She was afraid if she pushed, if she asked for closeness, the fragile balance holding their lives, Together would shatter. Daniel noticed her. Of course. He noticed her relentless pace, her exhaustion, the slump of her shoulders when she thought no one was looking. He admired her determination, but underneath was a quiet fear. Fear that she was carrying too much fear that she was running herself into the ground. But his own silence kept him captive. He didn't know how to reach her without confronting the grief he had buried so deep. And so he said nothing, letting her move forward, even as she drifted further from him. And so they lived to people, tied together by the same loss, yet traveling separate paths to outrun it. The house became not a home, but a mausoleum of memories. Every corner whispered of Mara. The kitchen still carried echoes of her laughter. The faint smell of pancakes clung to the walls like a ghost. The living room seemed to hum with music. That no longer played. But instead of sharing those memories, they buried them, because speaking them aloud felt like reopening wounds too raw to touch. Years passed like this quietly, heavily, with both of them surviving rather than living. Grief is not always a tidal wave that knocks you down in one blow. Sometimes it is a fog that creeps in slowly, reshaping everything until you no longer recognize the world around you. And then, one evening, something shifted. Sarah had just returned. From practice, her muscles aching, her body drained. She dropped her bag by the door and collapsed onto the couch with a sigh. Daniel, passing through the living room, paused. He hadn't really looked at her in a long time, not like this. For the first time in years, he noticed the fatigue in her eyes, the weight she carried in her shoulders, and something stirred inside him. A memory of the father he had once been. He sat down beside her, hesitated for a moment, and then said softly, "You don't have to carry it all by yourself, Sarah." The words were simple, but they cracked. Something open. Sarah blinked at him, caught off guard. For so long, their conversations had been stripped down to surface-level necessities. But these words were different. They were gentle, real, vulnerable. And in that moment, something inside her broke. The tears came fast, unrestrained, years of grief spilling out of her all at once, as she cried the way only someone who has been, holding it in for far too long, can cry, body shaking, voice trembling, unable to stop. And Daniel, for the first time since Mara's passing, didn't hold back either. His own tears fell freely. His shoulders shook as years of silence cracked open. They sat together on that couch, father and daughter, finally letting it out. Not as two people trapped in their separate grief, but as a family broken, yes, but still together. That night did not erase the pain. It didn't bring Mara back, but it opened a door. A door to something they had both been missing. A reminder that grief, when shared, is softer. That silence is not strength. That healing doesn't come from burying the pain, but from facing it together. From that night forward, their relationship began to change in small but meaningful ways. They started talking more, not always about big things, sometimes just about little moments. A funny story from Sarah's practice, memory of Mara's favorite song, a thought that would have once gone unspoken. They started cooking together, even if it was just scrambled eggs or reheated leftovers. They sat at the same table again. They allowed space for laughter to creep back in, tentatively at first. But real, it wasn't perfect. Some days the silence still felt heavy. Some nights Daniel still stayed too long at his computer. Some mornings Sarah still drowned herself in busyness to keep the ache at bay. Healing wasn't linear. It wasn't neat. But there was movement now. A slow but steady return to one another. In time, Sarah realized that her father's love had never disappeared. It had just been buried under the weight of his grief. And Daniel realized that his daughter didn't just need routines and structure. She needed him, his presence, his voice, his willingness to remember Mara with her, to face the loss together rather than apart. Their story was never about explosive arguments or dramatic betrayals. It was about something quieter but just as powerful. the way silence can become a barrier, and the way breaking that silence can change everything. Sometimes healing begins not with grand gestures, but with a single sentence spoken softly in a quiet room. A reminder that no one should carry grief alone. And for Daniel and Sarah Mercer, that reminder was enough to begin rebuilding what had been lost. Not their family as it once was, but something new, fragile, and honest. A bond born not from the absence of pain, but from the courage to face it together.